Hello. So let's talk about real estate. It's one of the most prized investment categories in Nigeria. A lot of Nigerians have a dream of owning a house or owning real estate. So in this module, we're going to talk about the different types of real estate investments. We'll look at the pros and cons, and then I'll give some preliminary advice that could help guide you in making a real estate investment decision. So the place to start from is to read an article on my website at www.shubomiplumpter.com/property1. I've taken some time to do a deep dive into the subject of real estate. So if you can read that first, just to get an overview, and then I will provide a summary in this course. Now, there's some points to note when you're thinking of buying real estate. Is the location rural or urban? Because that would of course affect the price and affect the selling proposition years down the line. So if you're thinking of buying real estate as an investment, if you buy in a rural location, obviously you're going to pay less. It's going to be cheaper for you, but that's the pro. But the con is you have to hold it long term so that the value of that location appreciates. And one of the major things to note is to look at the master plan of the state to see whether there are any major infrastructure projects that are planned for that area. Because if there are government infrastructure projects planned, then of course the value of that area would appreciate. Also, it could be a company, a corporate project. So maybe a company is going to site a factory not too far away, a bank is going to set up not too far away, a school is going to set up not too far away. So these are all planned projects that can increase the value of your land. So obviously, if you're going to buy land in a rural or undeveloped area, what we call virgin land, buy it relative to any future developments in that area, or if it's close to a particularly vibrant location and you feel that a lot of the location is going to become a satellite town for the major development, that it's not too far away. So that's what to look out for. For urban land, obviously the price is going to be more expensive. So at this point, is it worth the price point? Is the value going to appreciate? Obviously, you already have utilities for urban land. There's already water in the area. There's already electricity in the area. So for a lot of people who buy urban land, it's because they're planning to flip it short term. So maybe you're planning to develop it, build something on it, and then sell almost immediately. So it's a focused investment. It's not something that you're really planning to hold long term. While rural land is something you plan to hold long term. So by the time development eventually catches up to that location and the value appreciates, you can then sell. Now, ask yourself, or find out rather, what kind of documentation is available. For a lot of community-owned land, all they have is a government gazette. So the House of Representatives in that state has met and they've allocated that portion of land to the community. So they have a claim, a recognized claim to that land. So if that land has been properly gazetted, you're good to go, but you need to be sure you're negotiating with the head of the community, because there are a lot of middlemen involved in land sales or land purchases. So even if there is a recognized gazette and you have verified it, are you really negotiating with the head of the community, or are you negotiating with hundreds of family members and intermediaries? And your lawyer really is the one who verifies this. It's not something you do as a layman. You need to have someone who is familiar with land purchase issues to negotiate on your behalf. Sometimes people only have a receipt, so they don't have anything else beyond a receipt. It's still valid depending on the kind of land it is. If it's a land that is free from any government encumbrances, your lawyer has done a search and there really is no government claim to the land, and you have a verifiable receipt stating that you bought it from the recognized community, it's still valid. You can still go ahead and process more formal documentation. So if it's a receipt, you just have at the back of your mind that there's an additional cost because you're going to be the one to process the formal documentation. So take that into consideration when you're buying. Is there a deed of assignment? This obviously is preferable, where you have a legal deed of assignment that shows that that land was legally passed from the recognized owner by the state to you. So a deed of assignment is a good documentation, so you're sure that the land that you're purchasing was passed from the legal owner to the current owner. So that's also a good documentation to have. And sometimes when you're buying land from the community, your lawyer would then insist that you're given a deed of assignment just to document the legal provenance of that land. Sometimes you have a right of occupancy. So for those who bought land in Abuja, you typically be given a right of occupancy. And then for those who bought land in some other states, directly from the government, you will be given a certificate of occupancy. A certificate of occupancy can only be issued once. So if you buy from someone that has a certificate of occupancy, what you will be given is a deed of assignment, not another certificate of occupancy. And once you've been given a deed of assignment, at that point you can get a governor's consent for that land sale to be perfected, because the governor always has to sign off anytime there's a change of ownership of land from one person to the other. Remember, in Nigeria, based on our Land Use Act, and I suggest you actually read the Land Use Act, all government in Nigeria is owned by state governments, and they need to sign off on every transfer or sale of land if you want the highest level of protection. Also remember, a C of O grants you the authority to own land for about 90 years. So depending on how many years are left in that particular C of O, that gives you a sense of how long you have to enjoy it before you need to apply for a renewal, which is another cost. So these are some of the things you should just ask your lawyer to check for you and create a checklist when you're buying land. So governor's consent I had mentioned. So someone has an existing C of O, wants to sell that land to you, gives you a deed of assignment, and then you ratify that by getting a governor's consent. So these are basically some of the documentation that you need for land purchase. Some land have what you call a registered conveyance. So this is documentation that precedes the Land Use Act. So you find that some of the oldest families, some land in Ikoyi or GRA Ikeja, for example, the documentation is registered conveyance. The difference between this and a C of O is that this is not bound by the 90 or 99-year rule. You can own this land in perpetuity. So obviously this is the most prized type of land, because, so for example, if you want to site a manufacturing plant and that business is you have plans for that business lasting generations, this is a very prized piece of documentation for land. So registered conveyance is another type of title, and if you happen to find one, it's highly prized. Okay, now, have you verified the location, the size, and the documentation? Again, this is what your lawyer does. So particularly for land that you hope to hold for a very long time, especially if it's a very large piece of land, you can't just take the size that is stated on the documentation, because sometimes some owners are not even aware that their land has been encroached on by their neighbors. So a lot of times what will happen is that your lawyer will get an independent surveyor just to be sure that the dimensions are what is stated in the documentation. Okay, and then sometimes some land, they don't have registered surveys, and a registered survey is one of the things you need when you're applying for government ratification of your land. So in that case, you still need to do the survey and register it with the Surveyor General. Now, ask yourself, is it an investment, inheritance, or emotional need? So for example, if you're going to buy a house or build a house, buy land and build a house, are you doing it as an investment, in which case you want to sell it over time? Or are you doing it as an inheritance, something you plan to leave for your children? Because buying land or buying house, you're tying capital down. And unfortunately in Nigeria, there are not that many ways you can unlock the capital in land unless you get a loan and then you mortgage your house, you use your house as the collateral for the loan. So unlike internationally, where if you want to buy a piece of land or a house, you simply put a small percentage down, and then you can finance that house with the bank at single-digit rates. In Nigeria, you literally have to tie down money or get a mortgage from a primary mortgage institution or a secondary mortgage institution, and sometimes those processes are not as straightforward. So you need to ask yourself, are you buying because you want to sell in the short term? Are you buying because it's something you want to leave for your children? Or do you just simply want a home of your own, which is valid? Buying, as an emotion, to satisfy an emotional need still makes sense. And like I said when I was talking about the 20 principles of investment, look for the cheapest sources of funds. So if you can get a mortgage, go ahead and apply. Don't assume it's going to be hard. Don't assume it's going to be difficult. Ask, go to a primary mortgage institution and ask what are the processes for applying for a mortgage. You may actually be surprised that you have all the required documentation. And then look at the rates. If the rates pay you, you don't necessarily need to tie down money, a lot of money at once. Okay. Now, here are real estate categories. I've talked a little bit about virgin land. Takes about 3 years to realize value. Usually the price point starts about 1.5 million because I've included fencing and documentation. So even if you see land that is 250,000, say in Ogun State, you still have to fence that land to delineate your boundary and your territory. You still need to get whatever documentation, pay your lawyer, pay the government. So by the time you add all of those other costs, you need to really calculate how much it's going to cost you in total. So your minimum price point can end up being about 1.5 million by the time you look at all these other costs. In some places, especially if you buy land in an estate, you'll be asked to pay development levy. So these are all costs that you need to factor in. The development levy helps to pay for public works, roads, water, electricity in that particular piece of land. But the value appreciation is good for virgin land if there's planned development in future. So in 3 years, the value of your land can be over 300% of what you paid. So there are people who just specialize in virgin land. They look at the master plan of the state, determine where future infrastructure, future development, or future projects are going to be, and then buy land along the path of development. You have real estate investment trusts. So again, just like mutual funds, some companies buy land and develop land and then just sell slices of that investment to individuals. So a real estate developer buys a large tract of land and they're planning to develop it and maybe sell the houses afterwards, but they need financing. They need money to finance that project. So what they do is that they issue a real estate investment trust and people can put in 250,000, 550,000 and they earn an annual return. So by the time the developer sells the houses, usually off plan, you get a return as an investor of about 20 to 25% annually. Some will even give you up to 300% in 3 years, depending on who the developer is, but you won't own the land. It's purely a cash investment and not a purchase. So some people have registered real estate investment trusts on the capital markets, and some people just do an informal real estate trust. So it's just a real estate developer packaging something and offering to individuals. So it's not listed on any exchange. It's a direct contract between you and the real estate developer, in which case your lawyer needs to vet that agreement. So for property development, this is for people who want to build or renovate and just sell. So you're not planning to hold on to the property. It's going to take you 1 year to retrofit a piece of property. A lot of people do this in the US. You buy a rundown property in a very prime location, you renovate it, and then you flip it at a profit. So in Nigeria, the minimum investment is usually about 20 million. This happens a lot. So for example, maybe you and 3 of your friends go to a retiree who has a large piece of land, and you tell them, oh, sell us half of this land, and in exchange we'll build 3 units of flats, give you 1, and then we take 2, we sell 2. So you see a lot of all these informal property development projects around Lagos in particular. But the minimum investment usually is about 20 million if you're going to do this with friends, or if you're going to do this with an established real estate developer. But the return can be about 40% and above. So it's still a good way to invest in real estate. Also, because for this kind of arrangement, the property itself becomes the collateral for that investment. So even if anything goes wrong, you know that there's a lien on that property, and worst case scenario, you sell the land and get your money back. Okay. Off-plan sales. So these are off-plan sales are for homes that are still under construction. So you pay in installments. So let's assume you want to buy a home. What the developer will say, the developer will give you a 3D drawing. They will give you the plan and say, this is the vision. This is what we're building on this piece of land. Pay at a discount. So put some money down and spread the balance over 12 to 8 months, and you're going to pay less than what someone would pay after the building is done. This takes a lot of faith because you're not seeing the finished product. So usually what you do is you vet projects that the real estate developer has done in the past. Go and physically look at projects that they've done in the past, because that would give you an idea of their level of quality, their ability, their standards, attention to detail. Ask about them in the market. Do projects typically go over the timeline or go over budget? So what your lawyer is doing for off-plan sales is they're looking at the antecedents of the real estate developer, also checking, are they properly registered? Who are the directors? Are they going to run away? So those are the kinds of things your lawyer will be checking. And then sometimes for off-plan sales, you can also insist on a performance bond. So if they overrun, what is the penalty? So that you're not the one holding the bag if there's any overrun. So that's development. Okay. There are other categories: rent to own, mortgage. So these are informal mortgages by real estate developers. So what they do is, instead of you paying upfront for a home, they will allow you to spread the payment monthly. So in other words, you're paying rent, but the idea is that if you pay the rent consistently over a period of years, you then own the home. Now, a lot of times you're going to pay 50% above market value over a 20-year period. But for some people, if you're running an investment that already even gives you 50% per annum, it pays you to not tie that money down, and to use that money to make money somewhere else, even if you're going to pay 50% above market value. So that's for the rent to own. And then simple, straightforward to finance a home is bank or government mortgage. So a lot of the non-interest banks, the Islamic banks, provide really decent mortgages. So it's something to actually investigate. So in addition to a government mortgage, you can also talk to a traditional mortgage institution or a bank to see what kind of financing is available for your home. And then again, just to remind you, are you buying it as an investment? So you're planning to hold this and flip over time, in which case things like location, the title, planned future developments, those things are important. Are you buying it as an asset? So something you want to hold for your children and just leave behind as an inheritance, and it's just an asset you list on your portfolio. So when you're reporting your portfolio, for example, if you're applying for a loan, it becomes something significant that you list on your portfolio. Or are you buying it for comfort? You just want a good place to live in. You just want to satisfy that primal desire to own a home. Think about why you're buying a house or buying land before you buy, because that then determines your course of action. So that's it. Thank you.